Airline Pilot Guy, episode number 71.
Flight 209, you're cleared for takeoff.
Roger.
LA 123.9.
Roger. Request selected. Over.
Flight 209.
Hello, you're listening to the Airline Pilot Guy Show, the view from my side of the cockpit door. I'm Captain Jeff, your host, broadcasting live from an undisclosed location at the Atlanta International Airport. In this episode, Pakistani Airlines flight diverted due to suspicious behavior of two passengers. A British Airways 319 with engine troubles. Two separate instances of passengers trying to leave the airplane at inappropriate times. Your feedback, questions, and much more. So get all settled in. Tray tables and seatbacks in their upright and locked positions. Electronic devices powered on. Flight 71 is ready for pushback. Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Airline Pilot Guy Show. And again, I must apologize. I wasn't able to get an episode out last week. I really intended to, but just some things happened. Personal things going on in my family and other things going on. And I just couldn't do it. Ran out of steam. So here we are. Got a big show. So without further ado, let's start talking about a little bit of the news. And then, of course, the all-important feedback and your questions. So let's start with something that we talked about on the last show. The U.S. Airways Flight 4560 that landed belly up, or belly landing, gear up, basically, at Newark International. And this is something that I read in the aftermath. They were interviewing some of the passengers. And one of them, Jersey City resident Barkha Aganwal, 25 years old, faced a traveler's biggest fear when the plane's captain advised the passengers and crew to prepare for an emergency landing early Saturday morning. You'll remember that this flight left very late, I believe from Philadelphia, heading to Newark, and they experienced trouble with their left main landing gear. Here's the quote from her. "I started shaking and asked the guy next to me if I could hold on to his arm," said Agarwal, a pharmacist who was returning from a business trip to Oregon. "It took a minute to sink in, and it wasn't really until they started telling us that they would be yelling 'brace' and that we need to be prepared that I started crying." She said that she only began to notice something was amiss when the plane, which was scheduled to arrive shortly before midnight after the short flight from Philadelphia, began circling the runway. The plane flew near the runway and went back up, but at first I didn't think much of it, she said. Then I realized that we'd been circling in the air for half an hour, and I asked the flight attendant why we weren't landing, and she told me about the mechanical problem in the left landing gear. Now, the reason why I mention this, again, this is a witness. It could be that she was had her earphones on and didn't hear any announcements, was somehow, or maybe even sleeping, or she was somehow involved in something and didn't notice or hear the cockpit communications talking about why they were flying around and circling, etc. I really find it hard to believe that the captain of this, or his representative, the first officer, didn't make some kind of an announcement immediately saying, "Hey, we have some problem with the landing gear, and we're going to go, do a low pass by the tower. They're going to see if they can tell if it's down or not. Then we're going to go out here and circle, work some checklists, that kind of thing." Again, if it's true that they didn't say anything for a while, maybe they thought, okay, everybody's sleeping anyway. It's really late at night, early in the morning. Perhaps we shouldn't, bother anybody. I don't know. I thought that was odd. So I'm hoping that some journalist just got the information wrong from this passenger, which is probably the most likely thing that happened here. So we shall see. Okay. I guess a couple weeks ago now, here in Atlanta, a China Airlines Boeing 747-400 freighter from Anchorage to Atlanta was on approach to Atlanta's runway 27 right when one of the trailing edge flaps separated from the wing. The aircraft went around, positioned for another approach to runway 28, and landed safely on runway 28 about 15 minutes after going around. The onward flight to Dallas-Fort Worth was canceled. The FAA reported that the Boeing 747 landed without further incident after a trailing edge flap had separated from the wing on May 20th. China Airlines, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't matter, this part of it. Let's see, a resident living on the extended center line about 4.25 nautical miles east of the threshold of Atlanta's runway 27 right reported a 20-foot, 6-meter long piece of an aircraft fell onto the roof of her home on Sunday. Oh, actually, this occurred on May 19th. Sunday afternoon, causing 2 holes in the roof before the piece fell into the yard. Police reported that the 20 feet long piece belonged to the right wing of the China Airlines airplane. The flap section that separated from the wing broke in 2 parts, impacted the fuselage, causing substantial damage to the fuselage, and fell to the ground. So, not sure why the flap fell off, but I guess things wear out? I don't know. So that was an interesting one, I thought. Now, speaking of interesting, and since I clipped this article, which was several days ago, they've learned a lot more information about this particular incident, which is quite disturbing, really, and probably something that happens more than we like, but it shouldn't happen at all. And let me first tell you about the incident. British Airways Airbus 319 was taking off from Heathrow, and immediately after takeoff, they felt a thump. They thought maybe they'd hit a bird or something. The tower said that there was some kind of debris on the runway, and they thought it had come from their airplane. And so they went up and they started running checklists, and come to find out that the cowling doors on the left engine had come off. Well, actually, the cowling doors on the engine nacelle on both engines came off as they were working the first problem and getting ready to return back to Heathrow. I guess the cowling doors coming off the right engine on the right wing ripped some fuel lines. There was a fuel leak, and then somehow the fuel ignited. So now we have an engine on fire. You may have seen the YouTube video taken by several people in the London area as this Airbus 319 is flying through the sky, and you can see trailing smoke coming from the right engine. They shut down the right engine, so they're coming back in, single engine operation. And so they landed safely. Everybody evacuated the airplane without any problems. But the big problem here is that further investigation determined that there was some kind of maintenance work being performed on this airplane, and the mechanics who were working on it didn't fasten and latch the cowl locks on the engine nacelles, and the airplane was put into service. And now this is where it kind of gets sticky. I don't know on this particular version of the Airbus engine. I think it was basically the same engine that we have on the MD-90s that we fly at Acme, the International Aero engines, let's see, 2520 or 2521, something like that. Kind of a high bypass turbofan. Apparently, I was talking with a mechanic the other day, and they said that the locking latches on the thing, it's not really obvious if you close the cowling doors that the cowling doors are locked. Unlike the General Electric CFM56 engine, which is another engine that some Airbus 319s and 320s use, that particular cowling lock system is very clearly not locked. They hang down. There's something that protrudes that gives you a good visual indication that the cowling locks are not locked. So I'm hoping that it's one of those things where the pilot doing the pre-flight walk-around inspection didn't look right at this thing and not notice that the locks weren't in place, or maybe there was no way for him or her to see whether or not the locks are in place. But if it's one of those things where the pilot should have noticed and caught this before they determined the airplane airworthy and took it into the air, I would imagine that at least one pilot is probably going to be in a little bit of trouble for not seeing that on the walk-around inspection. But the people that really should be worried about their job are the mechanics involved with signing off, securing the cowling before putting the airplane into service. And then I'll throw one more thing into this mix before we move on to a discussion about something else. And that is that I read something this morning. I'm recording this on Tuesday, the 4th of June, that they think that perhaps they ended up putting the wrong airplane back into service, that this airplane was never intended to be considered airworthy and go into service, and somehow that somebody messed up and put this airplane back into service. And if that's the case, then probably several heads are going to roll here. So very interesting story. We're going to continue to follow this to see what happens. But again, the cowlings coming off the airplane, causing damage to the engines, and quite a fright for, I'm sure, the air crew and passengers on that flight on May, whatever it was, 24th. Anyway, not too long ago. Okay, so let's stay in the UK and talk about this other kind of alarming incident. And it was a Pakistani Boeing 777-300 model near Manchester on May 24th. And they were flying in from Pakistan to Manchester in the UK with 297 passengers and 11 crew. They were descending through flight level 220, which is 22,000 feet, about 80 nautical miles east of Manchester, when the crew reported possible terror activity on board the aircraft. They scrambled some Royal Air Force fighters to intercept the aircraft, and the fighters escorted the 777 over to Stansted Airport in the UK, and the aircraft turned south towards London, maintaining 16,000, landing safely on Stansted's runway 22, and taxied to a remote stand where security forces surrounded the aircraft. Authorities reported that 2 male passengers, ages 30 and 41, were arrested and charged with endangering an aircraft. The incident does not appear to be related to terror activity. This, however, cannot be ruled out and is still the subject of the investigation. The airline reported that the 2 men were making threats against the aircraft, and that this was noticed by the cabin crew, who informed the captain, who advised air traffic control. Sources within the airline reported a flight attendant overheard talks of a bomb on board. Passengers reported that 2 men were repeatedly trying to get into the cockpit. Those 2 males were later arrested. Initially, the crew had announced they were diverting because of weather in Manchester, but after landing and after the 2 men were arrested, the crew explained that there had been a terror threat, prompting the crew to raise an alert. So, again, that was quite interesting. Here's another story about the pictures that you can't see because I'm looking at them from my iPad right now, but it shows the 777 in a remote location at Stansted. And so, quite exciting. 2 men trying to get into the cockpit. That's a no-no. Don't think about doing that. You're going to get into a bit of trouble. Now, you know what? If that had happened on a U.S. airplane, I think that those 2 men would have been beaten to a pulp by the passengers because, obviously, from previous episodes occurring, let's say in September of 2001. Okay, this is sad news. 3 are, when I clipped this article, they weren't sure of the status of the folks on this airplane. They thought that they were that they'd all died. And then they knew at this time that at least 2 people were dead, and then 1 is missing. And then I think they ended up finding the 3rd body in a pond. But, and you've heard me talk about this before. Mike Rogers, one of the listeners and contributors to the podcast, is a private pilot, and he does the Angel Flight missions. And this was an Angel flight, a Mercy flight, that was flying in up in New York State, I believe. It was a Piper PA-34, a Seneca. It crashed, and of course, as you'll remember, the Angel flight program is there to provide transport for sick patients in critical condition, according to this article, anyway. But we've talked about Angel flight in the past, but that's kind of sad. The guy was out there trying to do a good thing by transporting some sick people to a medical facility, and I'm not sure exactly why the airplane crashed, but it did, and all three are dead. So our prayers go out to them and to their families. Okay, let's see here. Oh, I thought this was kind of interesting. The TSA, they say that small knives on planes likely in next 30 days. Despite opposition, the Transportation Security Administration expects to allow small knives on airplanes starting in the next month. TSA Administrator John Pistole told the Philadelphia Inquirer that his intent is to implement the new policy in the next 30 days. This was dated on the 24th of May. Originally, implementation was set for April 25th, but the plan encountered unanticipated opposition from flight attendants and then airlines, including Delta and U.S. Airways, and then from politicians. Nevertheless, Pistole told the Inquirer editorial board last week that, absent new information, I'm planning to implement it, but I want to make sure I've gotten all the input that is reasonable. So apparently the Sarah Nelson from the international vice president of the Association of Flight Attendants said that Pistole will have failed to do his duty to protect our nation and to provide secure air travel if he implements the policy. So they're going to be very upset about this, but looks like the TSA is going to go ahead as planned. This clipping I have here says that the ANA will operate 5 non-scheduled Boeing 787 flights at the end of May, and they have. In fact, I believe I read something in the news today that all the airlines out there who are operating the Boeing 787 Dreamliner are, in fact, using the airplane in service again. So every airplane is back up in the air and providing transportation for passengers. So we'll see. We'll keep our ears open to see if there are any problems with the airplane. I have seen isolated things regarding one incident where there was some electrical overheating of some kind of a power distribution panel that wasn't specifically related to the battery thing, and it overheated and discolored. They replaced it. They were kind of downplaying that one. And the other thing that I just read yesterday, I believe, another battery-associated problem with, I'm not sure if it was ANA or Japan Airlines, but apparently there was a temperature sensor inside this box that contains the new battery, and it was indicating an overheat situation. And turns out the reason for that is that there were a couple ventilation holes in the enclosure that were supposed to stay open to keep it from overheating, and some maintenance technicians ended up sealing those holes, kind of like the box that you have for the animal so they can breathe, and then sealing it up, and then the animal can't breathe anymore and it dies. Well, that's not exactly what happened, but apparently one of the mechanics or maintenance technicians ended up doing something that he or she should not have, and that's what caused the problem. So as far as that is concerned, or those are the only two things that I know of offhand that have come up since 787s have resumed flying. So again, we'll keep a sharp eye out for anything that may involve the Dreamliner and any problems with the electrical system or battery system. This is from AJ Volberding. He said, I was just listening to episode 70, and you talked about the two eagles that crashed on the runway in Duluth. In Minnesota, we've heard about this before. I would guess that the eagles were mating and not fighting. Eagles mate in the air, climbing to their limits, joining together, and then free-falling. Last year, we had 3 incidents where a pair of eagles fell out of the sky onto a road. So thanks, AJ, for giving us an update on the eagles that were entwined together and fell out of the sky and landed on a runway. And you'll remember that the animal guy took the eagles and put them in the back of his pickup truck to take to some kind of a rehabilitation clinic or something. And he heard some kind of a rustle or some kind of commotion in the back of his pickup and noticed that one of them, I guess they had gotten apart from each other, detached, and one of them flew away. But the other one was still in the bed of his pickup truck and is recovering at this rehabilitation center. Let's see, I'm not going to talk about that. Yeah, some information about drones. Apparently, I guess I will talk about this. There's a young man in at Harper Adams University College in Shropshire. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right or not. Has developed a technology to for a drone to kind of round up livestock, kind of like a loyal sheepdog. And it has a couple videos of him holding a target, a red dot, and I guess special cameras on the drone are tracking this red dot, and the thing is, it looks like it's inside of a gymnasium or something like that. And so pretty impressive technology that this guy's come up with. And apparently they're going to start utilizing drones to do that kind of work, like a shepherd. And then there's another picture here that an experimental robot developed by the U.S. Department of Defense. It's basically a drone pack horse. So if you can imagine this frame with looks like saddlebags on it, and then beneath it 4 legs that kind of look like horse legs, really. And so it's kind of a drone pack horse. So it doesn't fly, it walks, and it can carry 400 pounds. It can walk on ice and navigate streams and ditches. So very odd. And then more drone news. A German railway deploys surveillance drones to try to cut down on folks putting graffiti on basic or places where the railroad operates. And they say they're not in populated areas, and they have cameras on them. And so more use of drones out there. And then finally, I didn't clip this because I just saw this yesterday, and I think some of you have already emailed me and sent feedback regarding the footage from an Afghani, I think it was a U.S. drone, operating in Afghanistan airspace. And you can see in the picture frame in the distance an airplane, just barely make out this airplane coming toward the drone. And then the next frame is clearly, it's some kind of a passenger airplane, airliner. I don't know if it's an Airbus 300, a narrow-body Airbus, or a wide-body Airbus, or maybe a 767. But this thing just goes right by, and the drone almost hits this airplane. That's what I'm worried about. These drones, operating in airspace with the rest of us and all our passengers, and that's not a good thing. And again, as I said, unfortunately, sadly, I think it's just a matter of time before we see some kind of collision and a major accident. So hopefully not. Hopefully they'll have some rules in effect that will prevent something like that from happening. By the way, the first officer that I flew with today and yesterday just got back from a 2-day trip, and go back out again tomorrow for another 2-day. He is a general aviation pilot as well as an airline pilot, and in fact he flies the Pitts S2B and a decathlon, He does instruction in aerobatics, and he was telling me that he had heard from some of his Air Force friends that drones, well, I don't know if he would say routinely, but it's not uncommon for them to be already flying in our national airspace system, kind of repositioning them for use in different places around the country and around the world. And I said, "Oh, really? And why don't we know about that?" And he said that they're just not saying anything about it. And I said, "Well, can we see them on our traffic collision avoidance system stuff?" And he said, "I don't think so." So, again, that's just from him, and I don't know if that's true or not, but that's disturbing to me if that's true. So what altitudes? Like up here with us at 30,000, 31,000 feet? And he said, well, the jet-operated ones could definitely be up here with us. So I don't know. If you know something about that, why don't you send some feedback and let me know. Let us know. Okay, now some kooky behavior in the last couple weeks since our last episode. This one, an Alaska Airlines flight, an airline passenger who made unusual statements and attempted to open an emergency door during a flight, has been charged with interfering with the flight crew. Passengers and crew members restrained the man, and the flight landed safely. It was flying from Anchorage to Portland early in the morning, about 5:20 a.m. Pacific time. They were about 10 minutes out, and apparently the airplane was too cramped or something. He decided he had to get up out of his seat in row 17 and get out of the airplane. Now, maybe he thought that they had already landed and they were on the ground. I don't know. So he's trying to open one of the emergency doors, but obviously that's not going to work, right? We know that what keeps these doors closed, and in addition to the linkages and locks and everything else, is that when the aircraft is pressurized, there's no way you're going to be able to open that door. The doors cannot be opened if the aircraft is pressurized. You have to unpressurize the airplane to open the doors. And apparently that's not common knowledge, especially for passengers like this one. So now, another man up in Toronto was a little bit more successful with his attempt. They had already landed. Sunwing Airlines at the Toronto Pearson Airport last week. As they were taxiing in, this 32-year-old Toronto man made an early exit out of the Sunwing plane. The man wasn't injured, and officers arrested the man, who is believed to have mental health issues.
I'm not a smart man.
Yeah, that's not fair, is it? So this man, as I said, opened up the overwing exit, I believe, in this case, and got out on the wing and rolled off and was on the tarmac. And again, the airport police were notified of the escapee and ended up detaining him and arresting him. So, let's see, one of the passengers in the flight, Ian Sansom, said that the trip was uneventful until the aircraft landed in Toronto. The plane was still moving and just minutes from the gate when some woman in the back yelled, "The door's open! Someone just jumped out!" He said that the shouting was followed by a few minutes of frenzied activity, with flight attendants running back and forth trying to determine what had happened and to notify the captain. The flight attendants were yelling, "What? What? What?" And the woman saying, "The door's open, the door's open." So, again, it was an overwing exit on the right-hand side of the aircraft. And this gentleman, let's see, do they name him? That doesn't matter. We don't have to have a name for this guy. So hopefully he'll get some help, I hope. I thought this was positive news. A lot of the times, the news that I talk about on this show is not really positive, but this one I thought was pretty good. We talked about the impending pilot shortage. Again, not sure if that's going to happen or not, But there is a training program that is addressing the changes for first officers. So this article says, and this is from AvWeb, I believe, every crisis creates opportunities, the saying goes. And with aspiring pilots facing a 1,500-hour minimum flight time requirement for entry-level jobs in the regional airlines due to take effect in August, Flight Safety Academy is offering a new program to address that need. Flight Safety said it plans to hire college graduates who have at least a commercial certificate plus multi-engine and instrument ratings, and will give them free training for their flight instructor's certificate, as well as CFI instrument and CFI multi. Hours flown in training and in giving instruction will help the pilots qualify for the ATP certificate, the company said. The pilots must make a 2-year commitment to work at Flight Safety. Nancy Ritter, a manager for Flight Safety, said the current and future need for qualified professional pilots continues to increase. Our new Flight Instructor Candidate Opportunity Initiative will help to meet this need by providing pilots with a unique opportunity to gain the experience and flight hours required to pursue a career as an airline pilot, while earning advanced ratings at no cost and working as an instructor. The pending rule change has discouraged some students from seeking airline careers, according to a recent survey. In fact, we've even had feedback on this show regarding this. You know, people who have a couple hundred hours of training, they have some ratings, and they want to do this job that I'm doing, but they are really looking at this tunnel, and they can't see any light at the end of it. And they're wondering how in the world they're going to get 1,500 hours. So I'm glad to see Flight Safety Academy stepping up and providing this opportunity. So if you're out there listening and you think that this might be a way for you to get some of this time that you need to go toward your ATP, you should check it out. Okay, let's see. We already talked about the Airbus 319. This is something that I clipped. I'm not going to talk about it. Again, it talks about the pilot shortage or the perceived pilot shortage that we may have in the future. And I agreed with a lot of what this guy said in here, but I don't want to take up the time on the show to read it. So I think it is time. Oh, I forgot to play my news stinger, didn't I? Before I jumped right into the news. Darn it. Okay, well, you'll just have to wait till next time when I do the news stinger, and instead we'll listen to this one.
Captain, incoming message.
Thank you. Okay, moving to my feedback notebook. Let's start with Sam Paul. Sent me this. He said, saw this and thought maybe you could fly her home. And this is a little while ago. Remember, I'm kind of behind on my answering my feedback. You may have heard about this in the news. In fact, you may have heard about it if you listened to the Airplane Geeks podcast. They talked about it as well a couple episodes ago. Apparently, a DC-9 with a presidential pedigree is for sale. And it's one of the airplanes, VIP transport airplanes. Basically a C9 is what we call it in the Air Force. I believe was assigned to the 89th Flying Squadron. They're the ones that do the flying for the president, vice president, and other important people in our government. Yeah, so apparently it was an old C9 that they had used for VIP transport. And they were, I think they were starting the bidding at like $50,000 or something. It just seemed like really, really cheap. Not a lot of money for that. I'm not sure what the final bid was on that and if it was sold to anybody. And it said that it was the 89th Airlift Wing. Now I see it. It said in the listing that it was possible that it was used by previous presidents, but there was not an assurance of that. So, I don't know who ended up buying the thing or if they pulled it off the block or whatever, but Sam Paul thought, hey, you got some extra cash, Jeff. You should go out there and buy this thing and you can fly it. I don't think so. Okay. Oh, this is so cool. This happened a few weeks ago, and we were flying in from, well, let me just read this. This is from Bob Thomas. Captain Jeff, I'm a new private pilot here in St. Augustine, Florida. Podcasts and internet articles are a significant portion of ongoing aeronautical knowledge for me. I've been listening to your show for a few months on my iPad mini. I travel often for work. Last Sunday evening, that was a couple weeks ago, I was returning from Philadelphia to Atlanta and then on to Jacksonville, Florida. I was listening to your show as other passengers were boarding the plane and preparing for departure. Anticipating the announcement to shut down electronic devices, I removed my headphones and powered down. As I waited for the announcements and passenger brief to begin, the captain addressed the passengers over the PA, and to my surprise and delight, it was you, Captain Jeff. For a brief second, I checked to see if my headphones were still on. The familiar voice had me thinking I had forgotten to remove them. What a treat to know you were at the flight controls. Enjoy the show. Looking forward to flying with you again sometime soon. And he attached one of his favorite flight photos on final for runway 13 at Kilo Sierra Golf Juliet. Beautiful picture there. So that must be the airport near St. Augustine. I can see the Atlantic in the background and the intercoastal waterway. This is Bob Thomas, a new private pilot. So I remember you, Bob, and it kind of caught me off guard. Now, number one, it wasn't me at the controls because it was actually the first officer's leg, and I was on the radio doing the pilot monitoring duties that day, or that flight. And so I was sitting in my seat, and the first officer was standing in the doorway saying goodbye. And I sometimes I'll turn sideways a little bit and just stay in my seat and kind of say goodbye to the passengers at the same time. And not trying, I don't want to get in the way of the first officer saying goodbye because it was his leg, his flight, and he deserves all the credit or the criticism that he may receive from passengers. But I distinctly remember a person, you, Bob, coming up, and as you were making your turn to exit the front of the airplane, you said something like, "Hey, Captain Jeff, enjoy your podcast or your blog," or something like that. I went, and I remember you were holding, you must have been holding your iPad as you were getting off the airplane, and then the first officer looked at me and goes, "What did he say? What was that about?" And I think that the first officer I was flying with here didn't know that I had this podcast, and then I said, I'll explain it in a minute. And he goes, "What was he talking about?" And I said, "Well, I do this podcast, blah, blah, blah." So that was very cool. And Bob, next time you know it's me, come on up to the cockpit, I'll give you the tour. We can talk a little bit. Maybe you were late for a connection or something, going from Atlanta to Jacksonville, I don't know. But anyway, I thought that was very cool. So people have asked me in the past, actually, hey, have you ever had anybody, any of your listeners to the Airline Pilot Guy, ever, approach you on the airplane and say, "Hey, I listened to your show"? And only one other person, Justin, a Pinnacle Airlines pilot, we've heard from him in the past, said, "Hey, are you the guy that has the Aviation podcast? Your voice sounds familiar." And I said, "Yeah." And that was the only time that I know of anyway, that someone was on my airplane that actually is a listener to the show. So, Bob, I'm glad that you sent me the email and that you're a listener. And again, next time, if you know it's me up there, don't go running off. We gotta talk. So, thanks for sending in the feedback, and continue to listen and send feedback in the future. Okay, this is from Nir from Israel, Nir. He put in parentheses, and this is very helpful. Thank you, Nir. And everybody listening here, if you have a name that looks like it's hard to pronounce for someone like me, put in some kind of phonetic spelling so that I know how to pronounce it. And he did that. He put in quotes N-E-A-R, so I know that pronouncing his name. You know what? Actually, Nir, I think I would have pronounced it like that anyway. I guess I would have been lucky, right? Okay, here we go. Dear Captain Jeff, I thoroughly enjoy your show. Oh, wait a minute. Whoever it was that said I need to play sound effects between feedback and that kind of thing. Again, I have to apologize because I've been remiss in my duties. So here we go. Okay, I'm going to do that again because it was too loud. Okay, now back to the feedback from Near. I thoroughly enjoy your show and have been listening to you on a regular basis for the past several months. My name is Near, and I'm from Israel, possibly the only one, or maybe one of very, very few from this part of the world. Your passion for flying and more recent passion for podcasting comes right across. I have no problem with the length of the show. I listen to you while running. Wow, must be a long-distance runner. I like the format of the show, and it certainly works for you, as I'm sure you see the number of listeners on the increase. I think that you provide a most interesting technical and insider airline information show. How about a suggestion, Captain Jeff? No, I don't want any suggestions, Near. No, just kidding. How about inserting an aviation-related joke every now and then to break up the seriousness? And, I actually, Near, I have done that in the past, and I just stopped doing it for some reason. I guess I felt like I didn't want to add anything else because already the show is way too long, in my opinion. But I want to make sure that I answer everybody's question. But hey, it's a good suggestion. So, do you have a joke for me, Near? Hello, Near? Are you there? Oh, yes, he says. Let me start you off with one. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so here goes. Did you know that a Boeing 737 can perform mid-air refueling? With your U.S. Air Force background, you may be aware of this capability. Did you know that a commercial B-737 can refuel in midair with civilian passengers on board? Does that raise an eyebrow? Well, this is my story. About a year and a half ago, I flew aboard a South African Airlines from Windhoek, Namibia to Johannesburg, South Carolina. Johannesburg, South Africa. About 10 to 15 minutes into the flight, while we were airborne, the PA comes on asking the flight attendants to place the doors into the manual position and to prepare for refueling. At first, I was alarmed, but pretty quickly realized that the purser had not mastered the art of operating the automatic PA system. It made for a good chuckle, but it did not make me feel very comfortable with the cabin crew's professionalism, nor their competence. Keep up the great podcast, and when you come to Israel on any one of your 2 daily Acme flights, the local beer and coffee is on me. All the best, Near. Well, thanks, Near. I appreciate that. That's very funny. It's not the first time, and as far as I know at Acme, I don't think any of our airplanes are equipped with, or I don't think we use, if they are equipped with, the automatic PA systems. But we've talked about this in the past on the show, and it's happened a couple times, and I think both of them were with British Airways on some kind of a long-range flight where they're out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean, and they accidentally hit the switch for a water ditching, and that has got to be very disconcerting when you are a passenger and you hear that emergency PA going off. And so this one, not so bad. In-flight refueling, huh? That's pretty cool. So, thanks again for your feedback, Near, and I'll take you up on it. If I'm ever in Israel, I'll look you up, and we'll do the local beer and coffee. Okay, this was sent in voicemail from Michelle. So let's hear what she has to say.
Hi, Jeff. My name is Michelle. I'm from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Listening to your podcast. I've been listening for a while now. And I just have a question. I listen to both Catholic Pilot and Airline Pilot Guy. But wondering, I did my master's internship with Transplant Clinic. And just wondering if you had ever had the opportunity to transfer organs for a recipient that needed some type of organs, and wondered how that worked. Thanks for your podcast, and have a good day. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Michelle, for sending in the feedback. And yes, it seems like I transported transplant organs. Did I just say transplant? Carried transplant organs. A lot more when I flew the 727. I remember several times, and maybe it was because Acme had a contract with these companies that did transplants with eyeballs, and we always made a joke about it I know it's not a joking matter, but there'd be this big box, maybe, I don't know, 1.5 inches square or cubed, and it said, human eyeballs, be careful, handle with care or whatever. And, we would receive that package and we'd put it on the jump seat, make sure it was all strapped in. And then when we'd get to our destination, we would take the thing off the jump seat and hand it to somebody who was there at the gate to receive the eyeballs, live eyeballs. And we always said something like, well, keeping an eye on you or something, I don't know. Well, we thought it was funny at the time, but apparently now that I'm saying it, it's really not that funny. Anyway, and I don't recall back then having any kind of special designation. It wasn't like it was a critical thing. Apparently eyeballs can, last for some time without being in somebody's eye socket. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, and I don't play one on TV either. But so there are occasions when we receive notification from our dispatcher that we are carrying live organs for transplant. And again, I don't see them anymore in the cockpit. They must put them in the cargo hold. And when we have a situation where we are carrying these transplant organs, we become a specially designated flight. And it used to be lifeguard. So we would say Acme, or lifeguard Acme flight 411. I believe that was the format we used. But you used the term lifeguard when you used your call sign when you were talking with air traffic control, so that they knew that you were a prioritized flight. And now I think they just changed that designation to medevac. So if you're out there listening to a scanner or liveatc.net and you hear a medevac Acme flight 411, that's a flight that is carrying some critical organs that somebody needs immediately for a transplant. And apparently these are kind of organs that are just extracted from a live body, or maybe just deceased body, taken out. Hopefully just deceased, and then transported quickly to another city to be received into the patient. And so basically a very, very long, drawn-out answer, Michelle. Sorry. Yes, I have experienced that, and I hear it all the time. Well, not all the time, but occasionally you'll hear on the radio frequencies somebody using that term, either lifeguard or medevac. And so, and we're very, very happy to provide this service, just like the volunteers that take critically ill patients places that can't afford transportation, the Angel Flight folks. It's a very, very needed service. I'm not sure what the airlines charge for transportation of critical transplant organs, if they charge a premium for it or if they do it as a public service. I don't know the answer to that one. I know you didn't ask, but I was just thinking out loud, so I'm not sure about that. But Michelle, again, thanks for listening to both the Airline Pilot Guy and the Catholic Pilot. And unfortunately, lately in the last year or so, most of the stuff that you get on the Catholic Pilot feed is the stuff that everybody gets on the Airline Pilot Guy feed, because I just don't have a lot of time to do much more. But I intend to in the future. Hopefully I'll get a Catholic Pilot episode out there sometime soon. Okay, let's continue with the audio feedback. This is from Larry James.
Hello, Captain Jeff. It's Larry calling, sending in some feedback from Washington, D.C., USA, land of the free, home of the brave, where the streets are paved with gold. I'm a recent arrival to the Airline Pilot Guy world. I really enjoy your podcast, and I eagerly await, I have to say, each episode, which I try to catch hot out of the oven whenever they appear. It took a bit of hemming and hawing on my part to finally get around to sending this in. but my therapist suggested it would be good for me. I'm a recovering radio journalist, so I usually try to stay away from situations where I might be called upon to use a microphone. The exception to that is the mic in my Bose headset that I wear when I'm flight instructing at Potomac Airfield, which is located pretty much smack dab in the middle of the Circle of Doom, the flight restricted zone that surrounds our nation's capital. So when your travels bring you to D.C., give me a shout and I'll show you around or buy you a beer or something. In the meantime, just for laughs, look up People Like Us Pilots on YouTube. It's a BBC mockumentary from quite some time ago, maybe early 2000, something like that. It takes a hilarious look at what it's really like on your side of the cockpit door at a well-known British airline, which the mockumentarians call Anonym Air. A great send-up of both airline crews and the ink-stained wretches of my former calling, journalism. That's enough, as I'm trying to cut back on my babbling. Love your show. Keep 'em coming. Cheers, Larry.
Well, thanks, Larry. And it's just so obvious to me that you have professional experience in broadcasting. You have a great voice and a great delivery, and I appreciate your sending the feedback. And definitely, I have several people up in the Washington, D.C. area that are listeners, and we tried but failed several months back to do a meetup, but we need to do that. We just have to do it sometime. Lots of aviation enthusiasts up there in the D.C. area. And thank you so much for sending me a link to that mockumentary on the BBC. I was falling over, well, not literally, but almost, laughing, crying almost, because it's such a good production. Again, People Like Us Pilots. Just do a Google search. I'll have the links in the show notes. It was a 3-part, I believe, YouTube video thing, and it is just so funny. What I was really impressed with were these were clearly actors pretending to be airline pilots and airline personnel and journalists, etc. And whoever did the research for the show really did a fantastic job, because these guys were up there doing checklists and doing things in the cockpit which were like just spot on. There was none of that kind of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're saying this way or doing this way. These people, obviously somebody did their research, and it was very realistic. And I was really kind of surprised that these were actors and not real pilots. And it's just so funny. You have to click on the links in the show notes to this 3-part YouTube episode of People Like Us, in this case, pilots. Very, very funny. That great, very, very dry, very sarcastic British humor, which I cherish. So thanks, Larry, for sending that, and look forward to hearing from you more in the future. Okay, let's go back to my notebook and see what or who is next. Well, it's Steve King again, not the author. He says, howdy from gate E11 at Houston International. In regards to the quality of U.S. airports and their immigration procedures comparing to the rest of the world, remember we had this discussion about, I believe it was initiated by a discussion of Patrick Smith, the Ask the Pilot blog author, and recent author of a book that was just recently published, which I have not read yet, called Cockpit Confidential, I believe. And anyway, he put out a blog post saying, the state of the U.S. airports and our immigration and all the facilities compared to other facilities around the world is just substandard. We used to be the gold standard, but now we're sadly lacking behind, in his opinion. And so somebody was asking me my opinion about that. And so this is Steve's take on the whole thing. He says, in regard to the quality of U.S. airports and their immigration procedures comparing to the rest of the world, I think there was one fact not mentioned. Compared to other countries, the number of international airports we have is staggering compared to other countries. We have LAX, MIA, JFK, IAH, DEN, Los Angeles, Miami, Kennedy, Houston, Denver, etc. Most states have a major international airport. Most other countries have one, maybe two, total in their whole country. When I lived in Malaysia, we had the brand new, at that time, Kuala Lumpur International Airport, which was fantastic. Fast immigration and beautiful facilities. The other airports in Malaysia were far less superior. That didn't matter, though, because all international travelers came through KLIA, Kuala Lumpur. KLIA was the face of the airport system in Malaysia. The same can be said for England, France, Hong Kong, even Nigeria, which would be a whole feedback on its own. My experience was ... interesting. They can all focus their efforts on one or two facilities while the U.S. has to spread its resources across many. One quick question. Tucson Airport shares runways with an Air Force base. Watching F-16s take off while sitting at your gate sure beats watching those electric carts driving around the terminal yelling at people. I don't know. I think that's pretty funny. My question is how ATC works when sharing a runway and the pattern with military aircraft. Is it civilian or military controlled? Can you still hear their ATC calls to build that map of your map of aircraft in your head? I think I've taken too much of your time. Sorry for the length of the email. It wasn't bad at all. Have a nice Memorial Day holiday. You can tell how old this is, sorry. And thank you for your Air Force service. Take care, Steve King, Maryland. And you're welcome. And it was my honor to serve in the Armed Forces of the United States back in the 80s, which was a good time to be in the Armed Forces in the United States. Those were the Reagan years, where morale was improving and more money was being pumped into the military infrastructure back then in the 80s. Good time to be there. Anyway, regarding civilian airports and military, all sharing the same thing, that is what we call a joint use facility. And it really depends on the particular airport. If we're talking about the joint use facility, Honolulu International Airport also shares their runways and taxiways with Hickam Air Base. So when you land your C-17 or your F-16 or whatever it is in Hawaii, in Oahu, and you land at the Honolulu International Airport, or you're going to Hickam Air Base, you land on the same runways that all the commercial flights are using, and then you taxi over to that part of the facility that then becomes Hickam Air Base, and the hangars and the parking facilities and that kind of thing. In that case, the control, the taxiing, the tower control, the approach control, etc., is all done by the civilian, the folks there, as far as I know. Now, if I'm wrong about that, let me know. But that was my impression. A different example of a joint use facility would be Eglin Air Force Base, which we call Valparaiso KVPS. So if you're flying on Acme from Atlanta to Fort Walton Beach, you'll be flying into a joint use facility, which is basically Eglin Air Force Base. And that is controlled by military folks, military people in the tower, approach control, etc. And then after you land, we taxi to a portion of that airport, which is the civilian side with the terminal and that kind of stuff. So in that case, you'll see mostly military aircraft, F-15s, F-16s, F-22s, whatever, flying around the pattern, doing touch and goes, etc. And occasionally you'll see an arrival or departure flight, commercial flight. And so how does that work? Well, it works very well. Charleston, that's another one. Charleston Air Force Base is also the Charleston International Airport. I'm not sure if they call it international or not. But the airport that we fly into, our passenger flights on Acme, is Charleston, the Charleston Airport, but it's really Charleston Air Force Base. And again, I think that's a case where the folks that are up in the tower and approach control, I believe, are military. But it's kind of seamless. The integration between commercial flights and military flights, it just works well. And in fact, many of those military pilots, like me, for instance, and a lot of us here at Acme, were once in the military, Air Force, Navy, Army, Marines, Coast Guard, and ended up, after getting out of the military, flying in the civilian world, in the airlines. Same goes for air traffic controllers. A lot of our current air traffic controllers were trained by the military. And so there's a lot of cross-pollination and a lot of coordination together, and it just works. So I hope that answers your question. It's an interesting mix but it makes sense, economic sense. You don't want to have a separate Air Force. Well, there are situations where you have a separate military base and a separate civilian airport. For instance, El Paso. If you fly from anywhere to El Paso on an airliner, you're going to land at the El Paso airport, but right smack dab next to it. I mean, it's so close that it's easy to mistake Biggs Air Base or Army Airfield for El Paso International Airport. And the layout of the runways are almost identical, so you have to really kind of pay attention to what you're doing and not land at the wrong one. But that's an instance where they actually have separate facilities. There's nothing that's connecting either of those facilities, even though they're right next to each other. But in a lot of places, and as I mentioned, Eglin Air Force Base, Charleston, Honolulu, the integration is just pretty much seamless. It works. So hope that answers your question, Steve. And let's see, are we ready to go on? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to stop right now for a couple different reasons. I feel bad about occupying this. This is a room in the gate agent's area of the T Concourse in Atlanta. And I asked the lady here, I guess one of the supervisors, if there was a quiet place for me to go to do this recording. And so she put me in here, and there's I guess it's a place where people, here's a can of hairspray, there's a mirror here, I see, let's see, cotton swabs, the little Q-tips, and cotton balls, and I see an ironing board over there and an iron, and I'm kind of feeling guilty about being in here because I've locked the door. It's not a big space, but I'm sure that people are coming into work for their shift, maybe or counting on using some of the stuff in here. And I've been going now for, I think, over an hour, and I need to stop and go home and then pick up from where I left off, either at home or on my layover tomorrow. I'm going to be in Milwaukee, so that actually might be the best thing to do. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop the recording now, and I'm going to resume somewhere in a different location. And the other reason why I need to go is because I have to really go to the bathroom. So time to stop. I'm putting this whole thing on pause, and so stay tuned. Bye. Okay, I am back. And as I mentioned, I was going to stop recording and either resume again when I returned home, or, better yet, I thought at the time, yesterday, better that I wait until I'm on my layover again. And now I am in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, at the beautiful Hilton downtown. Oh, so, you know what? I forgot to mention. I did mention last week I had planned to do a podcast, but I had many, many things happening in my life. And one of the things I was determined not to let this podcast do, this Airline Pilot Guy podcast, was to monopolize my life or to somehow interfere with what I do with my family at home and take away precious time from them. And so I've really tried hard, I think I've mentioned this before, to only spend time producing and editing, recording the show while I'm on the road. And I've failed a few times, and I've gone ahead and used the time at home to record the show because I kind of feel guilty. I know a lot of you out there are kind of count on me to put out an episode every week or so. And but I've decided to reinvest my involvement only in doing this show while I'm on my trips. And so that might mean in the future that I don't get one out every week. And it may also mean that, well, I don't know what else it could mean. So I am going to do my darndest to ensure that you are fed in a consistent way, on a consistent basis. Wow, I must be tired. It's day 3 of 4 days of flying this week. Now, 2 separate trips, Monday, Tuesday, and a Wednesday, Thursday trip, 2 days put together. I'm wondering if I'm going to change that strategy for next month, for July. Maybe go back to my 3-day and then throwing in an extra turnaround or extra 2-day trip here and there just to make up the difference in the fill up the month. Because this 2-day thing hardly leaves me any time at all. They're long days, and it hardly leaves me any time at all to do the kind of show prep that you kind of deserve, or not kind of, you do deserve. And sometimes I am just plumb tuckered out. In fact, I have to admit that after I set up all my equipment here, I decided that I'd just take a little nap. So I took a 20-minuter, and so here I am. Okay, so one of the things I forgot to mention was that on Monday, when I was on my layover in, let's see, where was I? It was, no, I'm in Milwaukee right now. Des Moines. You see, I go so many darn different places, I can't even keep them straight. Monday, I was in Des Moines. Now, I'd planned to arrive in Des Moines at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Perfect, I thought. I'll get there and knock out this podcast, and I might even have time to meet one of my listeners. And when we got to the airplane, the third flight of the day on Monday, there was a problem. The crew that brought it in had written up the first officer's comm panel, the radio control panel that you use to select your microphone source, not your microphone source, but your what radio or interphone or whatever you're going to transmit when you push that button, and then other buttons that you listen to various different channels. So, for instance, and I think I've talked about this before, we have COM 1 and COM 2. COM 1 is a separate radio head that has 2 different sides, so you can switch back and forth. And then COM 2 is the same thing. And generally, we use COM 1 for our air traffic control communications, and COM 2 we use for our company communications, for dialing up the ATIS if they don't have a digital ATIS service, for listening to Guard, VHF Guard, which is 121.5, and yeah, so that's those 2 options to listen to and to transmit on your panel, your comm panel. We also have, we have navigation, radio, oral or audio, so that if we tune in at VOR or an ILS, that's one of the things that we do when we tune up an ILS frequency, is we listen to the Morse code, kind of taking us back a few years, right? And so an ILS starts with a dot for I, and then da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I think that's SOS. I'm not sure if there is an ISOS signal out there, localizer ILS signal. But anyway, that was just an example. So that was another thing that we can, or is another thing that we can listen to. Oh, the all-important PA channel. I have the PA selected so I can hear the public addresses that the flight attendants are making. I can monitor my own or my co-pilots when they're using the PA system. The interphone system, we actually have on the 88 and 92 separate interphone channels. One is the one that we have with the flight attendants in the back, and the other one is the channel that we use to communicate with our tug driver when we're doing pushbacks. So, and there are more options, and of course the international airplanes, I think they even have more options on their comm panel. But anyway, back to why I brought up this whole comm panel thing. We walk out to the airplane. I look inside the cockpit, and I see mechanics' uniforms with mechanics inside of them. And they have this comm panel on the first officer's side of the airplane completely torn apart. The head is gone. I see two big cannon plugs. And I said to the mechanic, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, they said that the first officer could not transmit on COM 2. And I said, "Oh, okay." And he said, "I'm going to see if I can, MCO that." MCO means maintenance carryover. We have an FAA-approved manual for all the various systems we have on the airplane. And if it's something that we can defer fixing for a certain amount of time, then we can go ahead and placard it. So, for instance, if you have, I'm trying to think of something right offhand that we might have a placard for, which is common. And of course, right now I can't think of anything offhand. Let's say a taxi light. Perhaps that's something that you can issue an MCO placard for, where you can fly the airplane as long as you meet certain requirements, most likely, and I haven't looked at it before I started talking about it, but I'm assuming that there is some kind of requirement that the landing light on the nose wheel is working, so it's okay for the taxi light, which is a lower intensity light, not to be working. Or maybe it's the stipulation is that you can carry over this maintenance item until it gets dark, and then you can't. So that's just an example. I don't know if that's really correct or not, but just to let you know what an MCO or a maintenance carryover is. So the mechanic goes flying out with the manuals, the logbook, and the maintenance. I guess MDM. What does that stand for? Maintenance Deferral Manual? I'm not sure. There are so many things I don't know. I know the acronyms for a lot of things, but I don't know what they stand for. So anyway, he takes that out, says, "I'm going to see if we can try to, or we can defer this." And then he comes back a little forlorn and says, "Nope, can't do it. We're waiting for another interphone comm control panel head." Not comm, but an interphone panel head unit. And so we're thinking, no problem. It's an easy swap out. We'll just do all of our pre-flight things. We'll board the airplane, and as soon as the mechanic returns with the new control head, he'll just pop that thing in, activate a couple or replace a couple screws after the cannon plugs are fitted, and we'll be on our way to beautiful Des Moines. So, a few minutes before departure, they get the control head, and they go in there and connect the thing together, and then all of a sudden, the look on their face was such that I knew that there was something more wrong. I said, "What's up?" And he said, "Well, the cannon plug, there's some kind of a problem with the wires. A couple of the wires are broken. So it's more than just the control head. We have to actually repair the wires." Now, each one of these cannon plugs that go with this comm head must have like 25 to 30 or more wires connected to it. And each one has a label on it with a number, a long number. for those of you out there, I know I have some people that listen to the show who do avionics, either manufacture or repair them. And so you know what I'm talking about. It's something that every wire and every wire bundle has to be properly labeled, because it's important in flying airplanes that that's all done. So they get their wire repair kit, and he says it's probably going to be about a half an hour. So I make a PA to the passengers and explain what's going on. And then the guy looks at me again after almost half an hour is up and says, looks like we have more of a problem. That cannon plug, the pins going in are supposed to lock when you push them in, and the locking mechanism isn't working. So now we have to replace the entire cannon plug, which means that not only do we have to replace the 2 wires that are broken, but we also have to replace every single one. And in this case, I think it was a 24 pin or a 24 wire cannon plug. And I said, how long is that going to take? And he said, honestly, this is going to take hours. And we put a maintenance ready time on the airplane at 5 o'clock. Now, mind you, we were supposed to be leaving, I think, at 1:15 or something like that. And so now it's clear that this flight is going to have a major delay. And so they said, we're going to see if we can find you another airplane. So we got everybody off the airplane, and then they did find another airplane coming in at another gate, luckily in the same concourse, although at the other end of the concourse. So we're walking down, and so that airplane had just come in, so of course they have to deplane the passengers. They have to do a cleaning. Cabin service has to come on and clean the airplane. Catering has to transfer all of the catering that they had on our original airplane over to the new one, and all the luggage that had already been loaded on the airplane had to be moved from one end of the concourse to another. And if you've ever flown into Atlanta International, you know that that's about a half a mile, from one end of the concourse to the other. Okay, so we finally got on our way. We made it to Des Moines. However, instead of arriving at 2 o'clock, with plenty of time to record a podcast, we didn't get in until after 5, about 5:30 or so. So while all this was happening, I had contacted one of our listeners, or one of my listeners, part of the Airline Pilot Guy community, Matt Dolan, and Mike Rogers is also in that area as well, but he's like highfalutin it somewhere doing some travel to Belgium or something like that. So perhaps I'll get a chance to meet him again when I have another layover in Des Moines later this month. But I remembered that somebody had written in and given me some feedback or asked a question and said that, hey, if you're ever in Des Moines again, make sure you call, and the beer or a dinner is on me. So I contacted Matt, did a search on my feedback email. Thank you, Gmail. You're a wonderful email service. And I saw that it was Matt Dolan, so I wrote to him and said, hey, look, I don't know if you listen to the show anymore, but if you do, guess what? I know this is very short notice, but I'm going to be in Des Moines this afternoon, and I'm going to try to record a podcast. This was before all the problems with the airplane. I'm going to try to record a podcast, and then maybe after I finish, I'll have time to go and grab a quick bite to eat. And so he responded right away and said, yeah, that'd be great. Or, if you want to wait until later this month, that's fine too. And so because of the major delay and the fact that we didn't get into Des Moines until several hours after the original arrival time, and I'm thinking, this show, you're listening to it right now, you know that a typical episode of Airline Pilot Guy is at least 2 hours, and more likely, lately, 2.5 hours. Well, that's just the actual time that you're hearing. Setting up all this equipment, editing and everything else, I mean, you can multiply that 2.5 hours by, several factors for each episode. And so I knew I wasn't going to have time to do it. It was, a really early morning get up and pick up at the hotel. Beautiful hotel there, by the way, Renaissance in downtown Des Moines. So I said, hey, let's just do this. Let's meet, if you're available, at the Raccoon River Brewery. And that's what we did. So I didn't have my H2 recorder with me. I didn't have any other fancy recording equipment. Actually, you know what I did? I did have everything that I'm using right now to record a podcast with me in my backpack that I took with me on the show. I mean, on the meetup with Matt, thinking that maybe if we found a quiet corner, we could actually record a show. But I was just too tired to do that. So I pulled out my iPhone and I recorded this. So I thought you would enjoy hearing a little snippet of our meetup. Here we go. Hey there, Captain Jeff here. I'm in Des Moines, Iowa, at the Raccoon River Brewing Company, and I'm with one of the Airline Pilot Guy listeners, Matt Dolan. And is it on your shirt?
Yes.
Oh, the 40 years, the Dolan Classic. Okay. Well, anyway, we're here. We just enjoyed a nice beer and a great meal. And I just wanted to let you know the reason why I'm recording this is because I wanted to give you the excuse why I wasn't doing episode number 71 of the Airline Pilot Guy, because he made me meet him and he forced me to have this meal with him. Otherwise, I would have been in my hotel room recording the show. But he is the reason that I don't have episode 71 out yet. So, Matt, what do you have to say for yourself?
I'll give you my email address.
So Matt, I'm just using my iPhone here because I don't have my other fancy recorder with me. But anyway, Matt is a private pilot. We've been having great time sharing stories about different experiences, soloing, etc. So anything you want to say to the Airline Pilot Guy community?
I tell you what, a lot of listeners I know write in, and I've heard it before. They enjoy the humor, some of the funny things that happened, in your career, and we've shared a few of those here tonight, and I appreciate that. And maybe as time goes, some of these will reappear on your show, the podcast. I know they enjoy hearing some of those stories.
Yeah, I was talking to Matt saying, I don't know if I've talked about this on my podcast or not, but relating stories of stuff that I've experienced in the past, and we had a great time. So anyway, just wanted to kind of give you a little glimpse of what it's like sometimes when I go on these layovers and get to meet with fellow aviation enthusiasts like Matt. Great guy. I'm so glad I got to meet him in person, and look forward to meeting more of you out there in the community in the future. So anyway, that's it. Unless you want to say anything else.
No, thanks for the good work that you do, Jeff. We really appreciate it.
Thanks. It's as I said many times, it's a labor of love. And if you want to pay for the podcast, feel free. No, I'm just kidding. Bye. Okay, again, great time with Matt. In fact, he was so cool. He goes, it's kind of getting late, Jeff. You need your sleep. So we finally knocked it off and walked back to my room or my hotel and slept soundly for my 6 or 7 hours before had to get up the next day. So that next day was yesterday, Tuesday, the day that I was in the closet recording part 1 of this podcast. And so here we are in part 2, and now I've wasted the first 20 minutes of this part explaining why I'm doing this here in Milwaukee. Will I ever shut up? Apparently not. Okay, back to my Evernote app, where I keep all of my feedback and news items and such. And I'm going to see, let's see, where did we leave off? We talked about, I think the last thing we talked about was joint use airports from Steve King had a question about that. Okay, here's something from a longtime listener and contributor to the Airline Pilot Guy podcast, Liz, in Washington State. She says, has anyone helped out Chris in Airline Pilot Guy 64 yet with tips for reducing the pain of changing elevations? No, Liz, nobody has. I've always had a similar problem. Here is my foolproof method. It works on airplanes, but also driving over mountain passes. The happier your sinuses are, the easier it is for your ears to clear. Do the obvious and drink plenty of water. Now, do something not so obvious. I use nasal/ocean or some other saline nose spray when I wake up the day of the flight. Number 2, if my sinuses are at all stuffy, I will take a half dose of Sudafed decongestant before the flight. Obviously only as a passenger, not a pilot. And note to adults, this means no alcohol before or during the trip for the trick to work. 3, I also will not fly without earplugs. You can use the normal foam ones, but there are styles that work better for airplane pressure changes versus sounds. I find that the earplugs slow down the pressurization process and take the brunt of the pressure difference instead of my ear canals. 4, of course, we will all still do the silly open fish mouth, moving the jaw, plugging nose to blow balloon, etc. 2, the old Valsalva maneuver. And number 5, the biggest and most important thing I can pass on, never be asleep during elevation changes. You need to be awake to do minor pressure reliefs throughout. It is possible that your long duration of pain is due to too big of a change at once. It can be a tedious list at times, but I do not get that painful or the painful earaches anymore, so it's worth it. I hope that this helps. Liz in Washington. Well, thanks, Liz, for all those great tips. Hopefully, you out there listening who has trouble with clearing your ears, perhaps some of these tips from Liz will help. Now, Jay in Utah sent me this. He says, I saw this and thought of you right off. I guess some pilots let some chicks into their cockpit, and then they posted photos on the interweb. And then he has a bunch of links to these pictures of chicks in a cockpit. Now, hey, before you start getting mad at me and being a misogynist, these are actually little baby chicks, and very cute photos. They're on the instrument panel. They are on the throttles, on the FMS head. I hope that they're not pooping all over this stuff. That would not be a good thing. But so very funny, Jay, and I did appreciate the humor. Thank you. Okay, now some more feedback from AJ Volberding. That was not right. Volberding. Private pilot, he writes. He says, this particular video does one. The Impossible Turn is the name of his the subject for his feedback. The Impossible Turn. This video does one as low as 100 feet, and all turnarounds had 1,000 RPM. Now, I watched this video, and I think rightly so. There were a bunch of people that commented on the YouTube video and said, this is very irresponsible, whoever put this out here, trying to show and build up the idea that you can take off on or in a general aviation airplane, a single-engine, propeller-driven airplane, and lose an engine just a couple hundred feet above the ground and be able to turn around, do a 180-degree turn. Actually, it turns out to be a little bit more than that because you have to kind of offset one direction and come all the way back, kind of like a teardrop, and land the opposite direction on the runway. And I suppose that it's very possible, of course it is, because they showed us in this video, to do this. Of course, the engine's still running. It's at 1,000 RPM. It's not stopped, and the blade is not just fixed, it's actually turning. So, you know, when the engine completely stops and the blade is not turning, that's drag. But in this video, the person who recorded it is showing several different maneuvers where he successfully landed the airplane by doing the impossible turn. But as I was mentioning, a lot of people were saying in the comments, very irresponsible because somebody who doesn't really know all the details of this is going to try to attempt it. And I don't remember exactly what the rules are. I think that maybe somebody sent me some feedback regarding this with some additional information. I'm not sure. I do remember reading this that, oh, you know what? I think AJ sent me some voice feedback. Hey, let's do that. AJ, let's hear from you.
Hey Captain Jeff, AJ from Minneapolis here again. What do you think about getting training for the impossible turn and engine out on takeoff maneuvers? As of right now, my pre-takeoff briefing on takeoff engine loss says that between 0 to 500 feet, we will land within 30 degrees of the nose, 500 to 1,000 feet, land forward of the wings, and above 1,000 feet, we will return to the runway. I have seen videos in which they return to the runway when the altimeter reads 400 to 600 AGL. What kind of training on engine outs do you have or do? What other specific maneuvers should I inquire about being taught, such as the impossible turn?
Well, that was a abrupt end. Well, thanks, AJ, for your feedback. And that's where I heard it. AJ, in his voice feedback, talked about the rule of thumb that he learned when you lose an engine and whether to continue straight ahead to try to find a place to land or to attempt that 180 degree or so turn back to the runway and land opposite direction. And so getting back to this video, again, I think pretty irresponsible, showing people that you can almost do it at any altitude, turn back around and land safely. And I think that if somebody believes that and they lose an engine and they attempt this, they're probably going to try to turn back too steeply. They're going to let their speed drop off too much and they're going to stall. I think that's usually what happens in these instances where they sense the greater rate of descent than they're used to because now their engine's not running at all. The more bank you put into your airplane, the less lift that you have, a tendency to want to pull the airplane around and so pull some G-forces, and that removes, I was going to use a different term, but probably not the best term, it pisses away, there you go, your energy and makes you more vulnerable to an accelerated stall, etc. So not a good idea. Whoever the bozo was that put this video on YouTube showing that you can do the impossible, apparently his point, there's no such thing as the impossible turn. But, not AJ's, but this guy who put the YouTube video out there. So pay no attention to that, especially if you're somebody who is a new pilot, doesn't have a lot of experience. You don't want to attempt this maneuver. If you don't have enough altitude to make a full turn back around, and I think the rule of thumb is like 1,000 feet above the field elevation, then just look for a place to set it down, a road, a field, whatever. Whatever your instructor told you, that's what you should do. So thanks, AJ, for sending that little piece of feedback in, and that's my take on the impel. Oh, you asked me what our training is like in the airlines for that kind of thing. You know, what do you do when you well, basically, we train for worst case scenario of losing one engine, and that's it. If you lose both engines in an airliner, you are basically controlling where you're going to crash. That's about it. There's no way you're going to be able to turn in it. Well, I take that back. Let's go back to that incident a few years back. Sully Sullenberger essentially lost both engines at the 3,000 feet above the ground point, and he was able to turn around and land it safely in the river. And, of course, after the fact, they've done simulator scenarios and other calculations that basically determined that if the point at which he lost both engines, he had immediately turned and headed back toward LaGuardia, he would have made it just fine. But we're not trained that. Well, at least we're not at Acme. I'm not sure about Sully's airline. I doubt that any major airline out there gives any kind of training whatsoever in that scenario. You know why? Because the chances of something like that occurring are so small that it's not worth spending the time to train somebody to proficiency to do that. Now, the only time I've ever trained to fly an airplane with 2 engines out was on an airplane that had 3 engines. And in the 727 in Acme, there was a scenario that we'd actually trained for to show you how much power was required in the remaining engine to fly the airplane to the runway and land safely. And let me tell you what, it was a handful, but you could do it. And so we actually did train for that. But you still had a power source. It wasn't like you didn't have any engines at all. So we do not train for that. At least at Acme we don't. If you're listening to this and you're flying for an airline out there and you do train for a scenario where you lose all power, let me know. What you do specifically. So that'd be interesting. So great question, AJ. And now it's time to move on to some more feedback. Hello again, Captain Jeff, and this is from Tillman in Berlin. In episode number 68. Oh, by the way, let me just pause momentarily before, and I promise I'll get to Tillman's feedback. The other thing I wanted to mention, I should write this stuff down, and be organized. Besides why I didn't get the podcast out last week and why I didn't do it earlier this week and blah, 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 blah. A year or 2 or 3 or 5 from now, who's going to care, right? So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But I do need to mention that some of you have had trouble lately with downloading my latest episodes. And I have to fess up. It's my fault. And I'll tell you why. When I was editing episode 70, the last episode, I was in a train and I did not have internet access. I was using my iPad, and it's a wireless only iPad, so I didn't have 3G connection or LTE, whatever. I opened up my WordPress app thinking, hey, this WordPress app, there's already some stuff in there that I can use to build my WordPress post on my website. And so let me open that up. Oh, here, look. Episode number 68 is a draft still here in my WordPress app. And so what I'll do is I'll erase all the stuff that I had in there for episode number 68, and I'll take all the time-consuming work of putting all these links in my show notes, and by the time I get home, I'll have a lot of that work already accomplished. All I have to do is upload the audio file and then hit publish, and boom, podcast is out there. And you can listen to episode number 70. So I changed the podcast name, and I changed all the appropriate stuff, and I added all the links for episode 70. The problem is that when I started using that WordPress app in my iPad, it had not been synced in a couple weeks. And so now I come home, it automatically senses my Wi-Fi signal at home, and then it tries to do a sync. Now, we all know, those of us who have smartphones and tablets and computers, and you try to get them all synchronized, calendars and files and everything else, that syncing is an art. And in this case, the WordPress app did exactly what it was supposed to do. It went in there and went, okay, there is no 68, there's only an episode 70. So what it did was it basically deleted episode number 68 in my feed. and replaced it with episode 70 with the date of episode 68. So if you happen to have looked at your iTunes directory at that time, you would see the latest podcast was episode 69, and then before that it was episode 70, and 68 was missing completely. I forget who it was. I think it was Nilesh was the first one to mention, hey, what happened to episode number 68? It's gone. I don't see it in my feed. I went, where could it have gone? And then somebody else said, hey, I don't see 70. Oh, wait, no, never mind. I do see episode 70, but it's before 69 chronologically. What is going on here? So finally I realized that I had really dorked it up by using that WordPress app on my iPhone without syncing the thing to begin with. So I quickly tried to correct everything. So in the meantime, a lot of these pod catchers, like iTunes and whatever other system you're using to download podcasts, podcast players, whatever, they take a little snapshot of my feed and work with that. And so I think it confused a lot of the systems out there, because all of a sudden you have episode 1 through 70 or 1 through 69, and then the next time it sees the feed, 68's gone and 70's there. You get the idea. It's all screwed up. So I tried to fix it. I did only receive a few complaints from people, not complaints like, you idiot, I don't like you kind of complaint. Luckily, I don't get many of those, hardly at all. But saying, hey, I don't know what's going on, but I'm having a problem. Maybe somebody else is. You might want to look into it. So my deepest apologies to each and every one of you. In fact, I still have people to this day saying, I don't see 70. I have to go to your website and hit the play button to listen to it. I have no idea why that is. I keep going back and looking at my feed. Everything is perfect. I look at iTunes. Everything is listed. I see episodes 68, 69, 70, etc. And then finally, if you're like Alex, who I believe is an Australian living in China, he's had problems with the last 2 episodes because these darn episodes are so long and I'm running out of room in my Libsyn account. I've actually uploaded those to a free server, media server, Internet Archive, and apparently the country of China does not like a file coming from archive.org or the Internet Archive, because poor Alex can't get he can click on it, but it says file can't be found. And so I said, well, check out number 62 and see if you had a problem with that one, which was another one that I have done recently that I uploaded to the archive.org site. And he goes, yep, that's it. That's what's happening. So in some countries, like China, apparently there are some websites that are blocked and censored. And so that's the reason why Alex is having the problem. So if you are having a problem downloading episode number 62, 69, and 70, my apologies again. I'll try to do my best to put them all on the Libsyn server, and I may just have to pay Libsyn some more money to have more space so that I can continue to do these weekly podcasts, these long-form podcasts for you. So now, let's see, I've wasted even more time talking about stuff that you probably don't care about. But I just felt like I had to say something about that for those of you who were experiencing problems thinking that it was something that they were doing wrong. No, it was me. It was all me. I screwed up. I promise that I'll try not to do that again in the future. So now, back to Tillman in Berlin. He said, I've flown VFR in Europe with Jeppesen charts as well as the German national ICAO conform charts. I've also used the US VFR charts. They are all ICAO conform as far as the information on the chart is concerned. The design is not standardized, however, and it differs quite a bit. I think in the end of the day, it is a question of personal taste which charts to use as a private pilot. But a big advantage of the Jeppesen charts sure is the fact that the design is the same all over the world. I can imagine that this is not so relevant for many private pilots in the U.S. Over here in Europe, however, countries are small, so international flying is a very real possibility for a private pilot flying VFR. From my home airport east of Berlin, even the relatively slow Cessna 172 will take me into Polish airspace in about 15 minutes. The Czech Republic is about an hour away, Denmark less than 2, and I will be in the Netherlands in about 3 hours. If I use the national charts, each border means a different chart layout to get used to. The Jeppesen charts make this a lot easier. I include a picture of my JEP chart and my German ICAO chart as a comparison. All the best from Berlin, Tillman. And so he snapped some photos of the VFR charts, or sometimes called sectionals. And yeah, they all look, I guess they all have the same information. That's the thing. Whether you're using the conform charts that he's talking about, the German national charts, whether you're using the Jeppesen stuff, if you're using the what do we call what we used to call them NOAA, NOAA charts, or there was a different term that somebody who had asked this question originally had used. I can't remember what, NACO, I think, NACO. Regardless, each one of those charts and approach plates are contain the same information, but it's displayed differently. So, thank you for your feedback, Tillman. This is from Carl He from Taiwan, and he sent me some audio feedback, so I'm going to play that right now.
Hi, Captain Jeff. This is Carl He from Taiwan. Thank you very much for your comments about introductory flight. I'm getting some real feelings from your experience. Sure, I'm glad to share with everyone about my first flying experience after I visited San Diego. Now I have a question regarding Autopilot. When do you think it's a good timing or bad timing to use Autopilot, including auto landing? I heard from an instructor in the airline that they encourage pilots not to use auto landing in order to keep their sense of manual flying. How do you think about that? If this is already talked about in your previous podcast, please kindly let me know. Thank you very much for the comments. Wish you clear sky and unlimited visibility. Goodbye.
Thanks, Carl, for your feedback. And what do I think about autopilot usage? Well, there are some situations that require its use, usually having to do with lower weather conditions in IMC and low visibility and low ceilings. But other than that, it's not a requirement. However, we need to be proficient in its use, and most of us use the autopilot quite a bit. Now, and as I've mentioned before in this podcast, one of the problems with that is that you start becoming dependent upon it, and you kind of start getting complacent, and you start getting lazy, and the airplane, heck, does such a good job. Now, remember, if you're out there listening and you're not a pilot, or if you've never flown an airplane with an autopilot, it's not a matter of pushing a button and just sitting back and watching everything happen. You are basically flying the airplane through the autopilot system. And frankly, there are a lot of pilots out there, and I've flown with them, that don't like hand flying the airplane because they can't fly the airplane very well when they're manual flying. And I think one of the reasons is because they haven't practiced hand flying the airplane. But again, year after year after year of using an autopilot, seeing that it works very well, it flies the airplane relatively smoothly, depending on the mode you're using and the kind of airplane that you're flying. I've talked about my airplane in various autopilot modes that don't really fly the airplane very well, or you have to really finesse it to fly it well. So, and this is just a side, talking about autopilot usage. I was, did I mention this yesterday? I may have, that I listened to tech shows and listened to Leo Laporte and the Tech Guy podcast, and some guy was, I think I did talk about this. I apologize if I've already done so, but it just, made me screw my head up into the ceiling when I heard him saying that, hey pilots, I have a bunch of pilots listening to my shows, and they all say they always let the airplane fly and land all the time. And I went, no, I know they didn't say that. That may have been what you heard, but because you're a tech guy, but that's not the truth. Less than it's a fraction of 1% of the time that we actually let the airplane, usually because we have to, fly and land the airplane. Now, when we're talking about cruise flight and, latter stage of climb, beginning of descent, etc., until you're in the terminal area and maybe on approach, the autopilot is hooked up because it's just more efficient to use that piece of equipment. So I hope I didn't go around in circles there, and I hope that answered your question, Carl, about the use of autopilots. But there again, we as pilots, especially professional pilots, but all pilots, have various tools to fly an airplane, and we are supposed to be smart enough and professional enough to know which tool is appropriate to use at the appropriate time. And in airline flying, Part 121 here in the United States, the appropriate time to use the autopilot is probably 95% of the time, something like that. But as mentioned in earlier episodes, and as expressed by the FAA, there is some concern that 90-95% use of the autopilot is going to 100%, and people just are forgetting the basics of flying, and that has led directly to many, many lives lost in the last couple decades. And the FAA, the NTSB, the safety folks out there, they see it, they recognize it, and they have finally come to the point where they are doing something about it. That was the special alert for operators, the SAFO message that was issued in January of this year, saying, hey, you major airlines, you need to institute in your training programs and in your communications to your pilots out there that they need to start hand flying the airplane, to remember how to do this, because it's becoming a major factor in safety. So thanks, Carl, for your feedback, and continue to listen and send me more feedback in the future. That was a new piece of audio that I found. Always looking for those royalty-free audio sound clips. Okay, now where am I? This is from Brad. Firstly, found your podcast recently via the Airplane Geeks. I must say, yours is also extremely well done. Thank you, Brad. I've managed to listen to quite a few and just wanted to thank you for putting in the time and effort to put these together. Lots of people really appreciate it. I know, Brad, and I appreciate all of you out there listening. Thank you. I have a question about fleet management. I live in a community in North Dakota, about 45 minutes or so flying time from MSP, Minneapolis, St. Paul. Airline service here is provided by a few carriers, but Delta Airlines via the Northwest Airlines merger is the main carrier via 8 or so flights flown by CRJs operated by regional partners. In the fairly recent past, our service was mostly with mainline DC-9s mixed with a few of the above CRJs. Now that lots of 50-seat CRJ-200s are being parked due to economics, is and Delta is getting a bunch of Boeing 717s. What do you think the chances of us seeing these here? The flights out of here seem to me full most always, and with the economy here doing very well, I suspect the bigger aircraft will be too. Not sure if the route length versus fuel burn equation for the 717 works for us in this regard or not. Personally, if it came to it, I would trade a bit of frequency to get mainline service. Thanks for any insight and have a great holiday, Brad. And obviously, Brad sent this back around the end of May, the Memorial Day holiday. And thank you, Brad, for your feedback. Now, remember, I am not a pilot for that company you were talking about that's getting the 717s. I'm an Acme Airlines captain, right? Got to remember that. But I have some friends that fly for Delta, and this is what they told me, that yes, I think that the company is looking at picking up a lot of that time that the 50-seaters was doing, and basically the kind of flying that the DC-9s are doing and have done in the past is going to be picked up by the 717s. That's the kind of flying, the short, mostly short-range flights and some medium range. But so I think that you in North Dakota are going to see more 717s. I think the economics work actually pretty well with that particular airplane, its size, fuel burn, etc. So, lucky you. Okay. Mike Rogers wrote something. Oh, you know what? He was sending me feedback about the Angel flight crash, which I talked about at the beginning of this episode. The Angel flight Seneca that crashed. And so we had a little bit of an email exchange. And he said, sounds like icing might be a factor, which seems a little weird in late May, but they were at 8,000 feet. If so, that is so avoidable, but I guess we'll have to wait for the NTSB report to find out for sure. I always try to read those to figure out what they did wrong so it won't happen to me on one of my flights. And that's good. That's the reason why I always try to read these NTSB reports as well, Mike, because I need to learn lessons from other people. I'd rather not learn lessons by making my own mistakes, although I do. Luckily not major fatal accident kind of mistakes. But every time that I look up at the pitot heat, I think of the 727 that crashed in New York State back in the, I think, late 70s or early 80s because they forgot to turn the pitot heat on. By the way, I heard an incident that happened at someone's airline that occurred not too long ago. The flight was it was a short-range flight. I'm not going to even tell you what the city pairs are because I don't want to give you too many details about this because it wasn't something that anybody had picked up in the news. But this flight was climbing out, and as they were in clouds, and the temperature was cold enough to have icing conditions, not major icing conditions like ice forming on the windshield and ice forming on the windshield wiper nut, the telltale sign that we have that the airframe is icing up, and let's turn on the de-icing equipment. It was the kind of condition where you could possibly clog up, let's see, a pitot tube if you didn't have the pitot heat on. The pitot tube, for those of you who aren't pilots, are the little tubes that sense air pressure coming into it and compare it with the static pressure, and then based on some calculations, determine how fast the airplane is moving through the air. What happens is if you forget to turn on the pitot heat, the ice forms in the pitot tube. Remember Air France 447? That was the first thing Well, one of the first things that happened in that chain of events of that horrible crash back in 2009. If you don't have the pitot heat on, the heating element in that pitot tube can't prevent ice from forming. Ice forms in the little opening in that thing, and it blocks it. And so now you don't have a differential pressure, so you don't have any airspeed indication anymore. You have basically an altimeter, which is sensing static air pressure changing. And so as they were climbing out, they noticed that their airspeed was continuing to increase. And so they started pulling back on the yoke, or actually I think the autopilot was flying. The autopilot probably says, wait, I'm supposed to be flying a certain airspeed, so now I'm going to raise the nose some more. Oh, that's not doing the trick. Now I'm going to start pulling the throttles back. Oh, that's not doing the trick. Let me pull up the nose some more. The airspeed's still increasing. Now the throttles are all the way back at idle. I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know all the details. But you can see the scenario here. Now, perhaps they should have noticed immediately that this is not computing. Remember, control performance. I always try to mention that on this show, that we need to know what the pitch attitude is in our attitude indicator for various phases of flight, for climbing out, for level flight, for descent, for doing a precision approach. We need to know what the picture looks like on our attitude indicator. We need to know for each of those scenarios what the power setting should be, our EPR setting, our N1 settings, various engine instruments, fuel flow. In the 727, we use fuel flow for everything. Basically set 3,000 pounds per hour fuel burn on each engine for a whole bunch of different scenarios, changing your pitch attitude for the various scenarios. And without looking at your performance instruments, you knew that you were going to be flying and you were going to be safe. That's why this is important. So it should have dawned on these pilots that, and seeing the autopilot pulling the nose up and the power back and seeing the airspeed increasing, it should have dawned on them that this does not compute. Something is wrong. And the first thing they should have checked, or they should have looked up at the overhead panel and seen the fact that the pitot heat wasn't on. But they didn't. Or maybe they did, but by that time it was too late. The airplane stalled and lost several thousand feet. And from what I've heard, again, this is all from second-hand sources, or third-hand, or fourth-hand, or whatever, the recovery was quite rough. And I'm not sure if there were any injuries or not, but it was not a good scenario. And again, if you're flying an airplane out there and your nose is coming up and the power is coming back and your airspeed is increasing, immediately, remember, pitot heat. Make sure your pitot heat is on. Go back to your basic control performance information, knowledge that you have. Now, understand that, guess what's going to happen here soon until you figure out or you do whatever is necessary to correct the situation. The systems in the airplane are going to go, you're going too fast. Now, all of a sudden, the overspeed warning is going to be going on, and it makes a racket. And there's no way, there's no button for us to push to stop the overspeed clacker from the voice saying, overspeed, and this clack, 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 really loud noise, which can be very disorienting until you figure out what the heck is going on. So how did I get off track there? Oh, Mike was telling me that he likes to read these NTSB reports, and that reminded me of that scenario. So, okay. Wow, talking about getting off the track. I'm getting worse and worse with that. All right, so that reminds me, I was going to send you some voice feedback, but since I'm in the air, in the back, for some reason they don't want me in the cockpit, in spite of my extensive X-plane experience. I'll just append it here. In episode 69, some pilot was talking about bad CFIs. They are supposed to be trained as teachers, but needless to say, there are problems with quality control. I think the best certified flight instructors, CFIs, are first and foremost fantastic pilots, confident enough in their own skills that if a pilot's about to put the plane in a spin, that's not a problem so much as a teaching moment. Most CFIs aren't that good, unfortunately, and so if the student starts to nudge the envelope, they do not react well. You also talked in that episode about WAAS. I love WAAS, W-A-A-S, Wide Area Augmentation System, I think. The fact that I can be shooting an approach and be within 15 feet laterally and vertically of where I'm supposed to be is just unbelievable. At my lowly airport, I am still in awe of the fact that my decision altitude is 250 feet. I assume that most, if not all, of the airports you fly out of already have ILS, so switching to WAAS may be no biggie, but out here in the hinterlands, the fact that many really small airports have it is huge. And yeah, you're right, Mike. I think that this wide area augmentation system is very, very cool, and it's great for airports that don't have the budgets that the big airports have. And that 250 feet decision altitude or decision height is pretty remarkable, but because an ILS system, instrument landing system approach, Category 1, the lowest you go there is 200 feet. And then if you go Category 2, typically down to about 100 feet or 150, depending on the particular approach. And then, of course, Category 3, depending on the level of Category 3, you could go all the way down to basically zero visibility, but and really no requirement for ceiling. So that is very, very impressive that these systems can use the signal from the GPS system and then augment it with localized information to make that signal extremely accurate. Very, very cool. Okay, now back to Mike's email. Regarding that resurrected article about the iPhone causing flight disruptions, my guess is it was a cynical attempt to get readers. If you can work Apple into the headline, more people will click on it. And you know what, Mike? I'm sure you're right. That has to be, what do they call that, link bait? It's a slow news day. Let's regenerate this incident and make it sound like it's a fresh news item and generate all kinds of interest to our website. So I don't think you're being cynical at all. I think that you're right. Okay, if only the pilot had asked the passenger to turn the phone back on for a second and seen if the problem recurred, then it moves from the realm of anecdote to reproducible science, and somebody would need to investigate. And again, my opinion, we don't want to do that, Mike, because that is my excuse for why we are 4 miles off course. And that's why I'm putting in this NASA report to protect me from action against my certificate. And I don't want to know whether that turning off the iPhone or iPad or whatever and then turning it back on and getting the problem back again, I don't want to know that. You know why? Because that pilot knows that that's not why they were off course. My opinion, your mileage may vary. Okay. I do have one other question. Does Acme have any policy training regarding radio etiquette? Every now and then I'll hear a pilot for a major airline read back an instruction, and he, it's never a she in this situation, sounds so absolutely bored, like they just don't care at all. It sounds very unprofessional in my humble opinion. Sometimes I want to make a comment, but of course never do, as I don't want to be accused of being an unprofessional. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm looking forward to listening to episode 70. Remember, if you're ever in the vicinity of KC, Des Moines, Omaha, a free dinner awaits, Mike. And I'm going to take you up on that, Mike. Very soon, right? In a couple weeks. So, the radio etiquette question. Yes, occasionally my airline has put out correspondence to us saying, look, you're getting sloppy with your radio terminology. You need to use the proper radio terminology. And as cool as it is to say, and when they clear you for takeoff, Acme 43 rolling, well, that's not the proper acknowledgement of a takeoff clearance. The proper acknowledgement is Acme 403, clear for takeoff. And then you roll down the runway. And it's especially important when you're flying in international airspace, because if your terminology is not standardized, you are going to have some communication problems. Communication problems can lead to problems that require you to submit an ASAP report or a NASA report. So it's in your best interest, professional pilots out there, to forego the sounding cool and just use proper radio discipline. And it's just as easy as that. And yes, we have been reminded, Mike, but it's been probably more than 10 years that I remember seeing anything about that. But I take that back. We had a recent quarterly training that talked about proper radio discipline and the importance of it. And basically it was making the point that it's for your own good and your own protection. And it was dealing with stuff like, we get a lot of instructions from air traffic control. Acme 403, slow to 180 knots, turn left heading 180 or 200 degrees, descend, maintain, so-and-so. And so people were reading that back and thinking that, well, let's say that they want you to slow. Let me redo the scenario. They give you a speed change, and they say slow to 250. And then you read back, Acme 403, 250. Okay. And then all of a sudden, they turn to a heading of 250. Wrong. What the instruction was is to slow to 250 knots. That's why the air traffic controllers are specific. They'll say speed 250, or they'll use the unit knots. Okay, and I am always very careful when I read back an instruction. If it involves a speed, I always say knots. If it's a heading, I always say degrees. And unless for some reason I lapse and forget to do it. But it's very important because it keeps me out of trouble. And hopefully it will alert the air traffic controller when I read it back incorrectly. It'll go, no. I don't want you to turn left heading 180 degrees. I want you to slow to 180 knots. Oh, okay, thanks. So it's for your own good to have proper radio discipline. So thanks for mentioning that, Mike. And yeah, some of the things I hear on the radio are just pretty pitiful and very unprofessional. And I don't know why, guys continue to use the bad terminology, but they do. Okay, I have some more audio feedback, so let me get over here and play it.
Hi Captain Jeff, it's Reese from over the pond here in England. My question for you today is I've got a few friends who are pilots and crew for major airlines around the world, and when I talk to them they say that when it comes to socialising with other airline crews, there can sometimes be huge rivalries between them. Also, they've said that there can also sometimes be great laughs and that everyone socialises quite well. So what I'm really asking is, have you ever had any problems with other carriers, pilots or crew, when it comes to socialising with them yourself? Love the show and we'll look forward to hearing the next one. Cheers.
All the time. I mean, I can't tell you how much I hate all of you out there who don't fly for Acme. You're pieces of you-know-what. And if I see you in the bar, you better watch out because there's going to be a brawl. We're going to get into it, you know what I mean? No, I understand your question, Reese. And I think it really depends on the airline and the culture that you're brought up in, etc. I've never really had a situation where we've seen aircrew from another carrier and we're antisocial in any way, or we're mean, or anything like that. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. They're probably, and this is not usually a problem related to a specific airline. I would think that this problem is probably rooted in basic human dysfunction. So, in other words, if somebody has a problem with another aircrew, it's probably because this person or persons have problems with lots of other human beings in their lives, and this is just an extension of that. So, no, I think it's a lot of fun when you happen to be out in a drinking establishment or non-drinking establishment, whatever, and you meet up with other airline crews, because we have so much more alike than different, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. I remember one instance, you brought this up, we had a short layover, relatively short layover. It was short enough that we didn't go downtown. It was in Chicago. Went out with another crew because we were riding in the bus together, and we said, what are you guys going to do? We're going to go over here to this place to grab a bite to eat. And I was just flabbergasted because the flight attendants at this airline, apparently when they fly trips together, the flight attendants and the pilots stay together the entire time. I don't remember what airline it was. Excuse me. And they were just having the greatest time, and the flight attendants were sitting on the laps of the pilots. Okay, maybe that's not such a great idea. Maybe actually that's a reason that we shouldn't stay together the whole time, because maybe getting too familiar with each other can be a problem. I don't know. But anyway, I was just amazed, because my experience at Acme with flight attendants was, first of all, we hardly ever lay over together anywhere anyway. And then when we do, we hardly ever go out together. The only time that I ever go out with other aircrew members, is usually just my other co-pilot. My co-pilot, because this is only a 2-pilot crew airplane. Very, very rarely, if we happen to be laying over at the same hotel, we'll say, hey, we're going to get together at 5, we're going to meet downstairs, probably have a beer, go somewhere to eat. You're welcome to join us. And sometimes 1, 2, maybe all 3 or 4, depending on the airplane we're flying, either the 88, 3, or MD-94. Flight attendants actually meet, and we all go together as a crew. Again, very, very kind of rare for that to happen on my airplane in the domestic system at Acme Airlines. Now, international, that's a totally different thing. I hear that the crews very commonly get together during the layovers. But I do remember having some drinks with this other crew from another airline, and remember thinking how really very neat it was. Not neat, but just different. How different it was, that their interactions with each other, how they could kid around with each other, and how that wasn't the case at my own airline. So, yeah, it happens. We get out there and do things together. A lot of times, the hotel we stay in, contracted by the various airlines, happens to be the same hotel, because that hotel may offer a special deal for airline crews, and of course they want all the business they can get from the airlines. And so it's not unusual that 2, 3, 4 or more different airline companies will be using the same layover hotel. A lot of times you'll be in the same van, you strike up conversation, and you end up seeing them later, and then, socializing. So a lot of fun. So thanks for your commentary, Reese. And let's move on to some more feedback. Lee from New Jersey sent me this. He said, thank you again. Thank you again for your podcast. A while back, you were talking about the safety benefits of backward-facing passenger seats. Back in the 1980s, US Air had all their DC-9s set up in a single economy class configuration, so that the first row of seats in the plane faced backwards with a table between it, and the second row like you still find on passenger trains and subways. Okay, so you have a first row facing backwards, the next row facing forwards with a little table in between. When I flew in and out of Pittsburgh, I liked sitting in that backward-facing row because you could look down or up at all the people on the plane during takeoff and landing. It was a neat perspective. It also made it easier to talk to family members who could sit facing you. Sadly, when US Air had a fatal but partially survivable DC-9 accident in 1994 in Charlotte, North Carolina, These seats couldn't save any lives because U.S. Air had changed their DC-9 fleet to a more conventional arrangement with all forward-facing seats by then. I would gladly sit facing backwards on an airliner, and it's too bad no airlines seem to have this as an option anymore. I bet if the airlines found out that some parents might be willing to spend a few extra dollars to be able to sit facing their children, we might see layouts like U.S. Air DC-9 had way back then. Okay, just a little bit of talking about that that paragraph, Lee. I think that the survivability issue with backward-facing seats all involve the landing or ground operations. I'm not so sure that. I'm sure there are some crashes that the benefit of a seat facing backwards would really be nil, because just the sheer forces involved with a crash. But I think they'd still say, though, many experts out there will still say that all the seats facing backwards is more safer and more survivable than facing forward. Now, the deal with the table in between the two seats, you're never going to see that again, because that takes up too much room, and the airline can't put as many rows of seats on the airplane. And we live in a world now that, well, you're out there flying airplanes, and you have your knees up against the seat in front of you, and you know that it's probably not going to get any better. So, unfortunately. Okay, on another note, I've always wondered what changed so that large airliners introduced in the 1980s and later were designed for 2 crew in the cockpit, while most airliners introduced prior to this were designed for 3. What did the flight engineer really do? And could a 727 or L-1011 be flown without one? Did the flight engineer make the jobs of the pilot and co-pilot that much easier? Was it mainly more modern avionics that eliminated the flight engineer from the cockpit forever? Or did cost considerations have a lot to do with it? Since you seem to have spent half of your airline career in cockpits with 3 crew and the other half in crews with 2, I figured you would be the perfect person to ask. Did you like working on planes with 2 or 3 crew better? What was it like transitioning from one to the other? Your comments will be greatly appreciated. Cheers, blue skies and tailwinds. Lee, the New Jersey high school teacher. Absolutely, from a pilot's perspective, having 3 pilots or 3 crew members in the cockpit, much better. Much better, especially if you're the co-pilot. And I've spent, 7, 8, 9, almost 10, more than 10 years of my airline career as a first officer on a 3-pilot crew airplane. And those of you out there who are listening and probably know what I mean. The captain, they're responsible for everything. The flight engineer, responsible for all the systems. If there is ever an abnormal emergency situation, guess what happens 99.9% of the time? The captain, if he's flying, looks at me, the first officer, and says, Jeff, you have the airplane. Get us on the ground as soon as you can, or whatever the instruction is. Joe, the flight engineer, you and I, we're going to work this problem. It was so nice going to the simulator every 6 months, 9 months, year, depending on the time frame. That's changed over time at Acme. But it was so nice because I realized right away that I didn't really have to study that much, because I knew that as soon as we had an emergency situation, an abnormal procedure going on in the simulator, that the first thing the captain was going to do was say, Jeff, you have the airplane. And I'd be just sitting over there flying the airplane the whole time everybody was flailing with checklists and everything else. So it really made life easy. In fact, I think just the other day in the airplane, we had said something about the pre-flight. And the pre-flight in the 727 was window heat, pitot heat, what's to eat, or something to that effect. So that was pretty much your responsibility as the first officer when you were doing a pre-flight. Hit a couple switches. You didn't have to do the walk around. That's what the flight engineer does. You didn't have all the responsibility for looking over all the paperwork like the captain has. You were just sitting there basically semi-retired, and it was a wonderful life. Now, seriously speaking, 3 pilots versus 2 really is a major factor when you have one of those abnormal situations like I was talking about in the simulator. But you really have one in real life. Remember the United Airlines DC-10, Al Haynes, I believe, was the captain on that. The number 2 engine came apart and severed hydraulic lines and basically left that airplane almost uncontrollable. By the way, an aside, let's fast forward into the future. Our airplanes now are being either remotely piloted by somebody on the ground or autonomously flown by computer systems. The number 2 engine turbine lets loose and basically severs all the hydraulic controls. You have no more control of your control surfaces. And what is going to happen in that scenario? Is that going to be a somewhat happy ending? Yeah, there were lives lost in that incident at Sioux City, but there were a lot of folks who walked away from that one and are still alive to this day. Could a computer be programmed to do all that? I don't think so. I think that would have been a complete loss. Everybody on board, crash, died. Northwest Airlines, 747, heading over to Asia. This is one of those air disaster programs. I'll try to look it up and put it in the show notes. I've talked about it in previous podcasts where all of a sudden the airplane almost goes out of control. The opposite rudder has to be pushed down to the floor to control the airplane. There was a hard over rudder episode, but the 747 has at least 2 separate rudders. They're detached. And one of them went full throw. The other one was still controllable. So the other one was the opposite direction, and that was the only way they could control the flight. They had to fly that airplane for several hours to turn around and land back in Anchorage, and they landed safely. Nobody was hurt. Everybody alive. Okay, now fast forward. We have automation. We have remote-controlled vehicles. We have autonomous vehicles. And we have a scenario where you have one of the rudder systems go hard over. Okay, no humans in the cockpit to use their brains to figure out what we're going to do. We've never been presented with this situation before. We've never heard of this before. How are we going to save our lives? We're going to do what we have to do to save our lives. What's a computer going to do? That does not compute. That's not in my settings. You're on your own. Everybody dies. Okay? Just throwing that out there. Just something to think about. So, having 3 brains in a cockpit to help with decision making, you have 1/3 more brain power up there. You have, instead of 4 eyeballs, you have 6 eyeballs. I can't tell you how many times that having that one extra person up in that cockpit saved us from making a major mistake. I remember once flying, and the captain and the first officer were busy looking at the captain's pictures of his retirement home that he was building on the Intercoastal Waterway. And they were really, really involved in this. Now remember, the 727 did not have an area navigation system. It didn't have an FMS system. It did have an autopilot, but again, you were controlling the autopilot, making heading changes, making sure that it was flying on the airways, the jet routes. And you couldn't just hit a switch, as we can now with our modern airliners, and hook up the navigation system and it's going to track it. As long as you've programmed it correctly, it'll go where it's supposed to go. And I remember sitting back there at my panel looking at all the different systems in the airplane. And by the way, Lee, yes, the automation and the sophistication of the systems back then weren't as good as they are now, because a lot of these things can control themselves and do certain actions without any human input. But back then, all of this stuff, like fuel balancing and electrical paralleling generators and all that kind of stuff, was done by a human. And so that it was a necessity to have that flight engineer person doing all the systems work. But as time went on, technology advanced. We have systems that basically take over a lot of the roles that the flight engineer had. Okay, so, and yes, it was an economic issue. You have 3 people up there being paid, especially back then, pretty well for being compensated well for their job. So you have 3, so you go from that scenario to just 2. Okay, now the airlines are saving a bunch of money on labor costs. But back to the pros of having 3 people up there, you have, my story. So these 2 are busy talking to each other, looking at the pictures and everything else, and I'm looking at my chart back there, and I'm thinking to myself, I think we're supposed to turn right here. And I'm trying to look around at the navigation instruments on the front panel, and these guys are kind of blocking my view, and I'm kind of looking around, and I said, hey, I think we were supposed to turn like a few miles back. And then all of a sudden they go, what? And they turn the airplane, and of course then we get this call, which was not an uncommon call to get when you're flying the 727 from air traffic control. Acme 403, where are you going? And then, of course, our standard response was, Acme 403, in the turn. And then we'd let go of the microphone button and go, okay, which way are we supposed to turn? So it's good to have 3 people versus 2 in the cockpit, especially when you have an emergency situation where you can kind of offload some of the tasks to that extra person. In fact, when I have somebody on the jump seat, I'll mention to them that, to look and, kind of watch what we're doing, help us clear for traffic, looking out the windscreen. If you see something outside or something that we're doing that is making you uncomfortable, or you think that we're not seeing, please make us aware of it. And finally, I will say, if we have an abnormal situation, we're probably going to use you. You're going to be part of our crew, and you're going to help us with, making a happy ending to the thing. So most likely it's going to be communication, making PAs to the passengers, communicating with flight attendants, even calling our company dispatch, talking to people on the ground on the radio. You are going to be used because my first officer and I are going to be busy doing checklists, and so it's always good to have that extra person in the cockpit. And I understand why we don't anymore. It's an economics issue, but I do long for those days, and I'm glad that I got a chance to experience it for at least a little while. As you mentioned, about half of my career, I've flown in the old 3-crew airplanes, which was great. Okay, wow, went on and on that one, didn't I? Okay, let's see here. Let me play a little sound effect. No, that wasn't it. That was not a good one to play. All that for that little sound clip. Okay, getting back to feedback. Brett writes, hi, Captain Jeff. This is from my website, Airline Pilot Guy. Brett Dietrich left me some feedback on the website, a comment. He said, hi, Captain Jeff. I'm 14 and just went on a discovery flight yesterday in a Cessna 152. Boy, it was fun. I decided that I wanted to get my private pilot's license, but seeing that I can't solo till I'm 16, I think I'll wait another year and a half. What is your stand on this? Do you think it would be good to do the ground school before I start instruction? I don't know, Brett. Perhaps some of my listeners who are private pilots and maybe recent private pilots can help me answer your question as to whether or not it would be a good idea to wait or to get some ground school instruction in the meantime while you're waiting to get a little older so that you can get your flight instruction in solo. I don't know. I would say, just off the top of my head, probably not a bad idea to at least get some of the ground school out of the way, some of the stuff that you can do right now, and then, make sure you review it in the meantime when you start flying, your flying instruction again. That would be my advice. But it may not be good advice, so I'm going to ask my general aviation experts out there. I know that I have some people that listen to the show who are certified flight instructors who are experts in this, that are going to now, as they're listening to this, going to record some audio feedback and send it to me. And it's going to answer your question, Brett. So keep listening. Excuse me. Okay, Micah writes, I've been enjoying episode 70 of Airline Pilot. Hey, Micah got 70. What's wrong with the rest of you? You may recall I'm newish to your podcast. I know, I don't look newish. I first heard you as a guest on the Airplane Geeks and have enjoyed APG ever since. Aside from having a warped sense of humor and being an airplane geek, I am also a food geek and love to explore new places to eat. Now I know pilots are always looking for good places when on a turnaround, so please let me offer you some help if I can. I'm based in Portland, Maine. The geeks refer to me as their Maine man. Maine like M-A-I-N without the E. I do not think Acme flies any Mad Dogs into Portland, Maine. However, you're wrong, we do. If you do end up this way, and you might, after Acme picks up the new 717s from AirTran, let me know. I live about 2 miles at the end of runway 18, so if you have a turnaround in PWM, I could lead you to the best Maine seafood around. What time is it? Oh, you know, it's time for me to eat right now, by the way. As well as a local microbrew to go along with it. It seems like you're in Richmond, Virginia, often. I am familiar with Richmond as my brother lives there. Did I read this before? This almost seems like deja vu, like I've read this. I don't know. Okay. Well, I'm going to continue. I'm going to pretend that I've not read this to you. If you already, let's see. The Hilton Garden Inn is nice, but it sure is a long ride from Richmond Airport. Yeah, it is. If you already know about this spot, please forgive me, but have you made it to Buzz and Ned's Real Barbecue? They're located at blah, 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 about 3 miles from the Hilton Garden Inn. And he gave me a telephone number and a website link. Buzz and Ned's has some of the best truly smoked barbecue I've had outside of Texas. The brisket is good, as is the sausage. The pulled pork is better. The baby back ribs are outstanding, and the St. Louis ribs are simply amazing. I recommend the cucumber and onion salad with it, with any of it, as it just seems to work right. Much better than the coleslaw. The baked beans are also great, but I suspect you are too kind to your first officer to try them. Yeah, beans, yeah, not a good idea. Buzz and Ned's is more of a joint than a restaurant with some indoor seating, but mostly outside under a tent. They do serve beer and do a great carry-out business. If you like that kind of food, it will be well worth the cab ride. If you cannot make it there on your own, let me know, and I'll try to arrange for my brother to take you. That would be nice. I am sure he would love an excuse to have some ribs. Well, let me walk you away from the buffet line and back to the flight line. I wanted to share a few thoughts with you in regards to slang names of certain aircraft types. You had mentioned that the Boeing 727 was known as the three-holer. If I recall correctly, this name was also used for the DC-10, MD-11, and L-1011. Yeah, I've heard that too. The Lockheed being one of my personal favorites. Additionally, I think a more recent variant on that name was tri-holer, as the former term has another slang connotation that is inappropriate to this venue. Well, yeah, and the L-1011 was also referred to as the Titanic because it was the Tri-Star and Titanic, and I don't know. In regards to Airbus products, I have heard them referred to as electric jets, as they are all fly-by-wire. Well, not all, but most of them. The name I use for an Airbus is an egg white or egg white jet. Those that occupy the flight deck in the Airbus are egg white pilots. I chose that nickname as an Airbus has no yoke. To me, an Airbus just does not have that rich and creamy feel that an aircraft has with twin yokes. I told you I like both food and airplanes, right? Feel free to take the term from me if you want, but if it is well received, give me the credit. If not, I'll take the blame. I don't know. I don't think I'm going to call it an egg white airplane. I do have a lot of Airbus pilots that listen to the show, and perhaps they can tell me some of the nicknames they've heard. There's another question that I've come up that came up on episode 70. You said you were certified for the MD 87, 88, and 90 series. Does that qualify you on the MD 80? What about the DC 9 and the newer Boeing 717? Lastly, if you do not currently qualify for the entire series, what are the primary differences between them? I hope you find the food tip helpful and you do not find my strange humor too awful. Thanks for the wonderful podcast, Micah. Well, thank you, Micah, for your wonderful feedback. And no, I don't think your sense of humor is bad at all, actually. I think it's pretty funny. Get out of the way, keyboard. Okay. First of all, Buzz and Ned's. When I was on one of my last layovers, the first officer and I were hankering for some barbecue, and so Buzz and Ned's was one of the two barbecue restaurants that the van driver from the hotel mentioned. And he even offered that he would take us to Buzz and Ned's, but it was kind of a ways. But we decided instead to go to the other place he mentioned called Alamo, which is the other direction within walking distance. And it, too, was kind of a hole in the wall. No indoor seating at all. They did have like a tent outside that we sat underneath. It was okay. Didn't give you a lot of meat for the meat plate. But it was pretty good barbecue. But I bet Buzz and Ned's would have been better. So next time I'm in Richmond, I may just have to get the cab or the hotel van to take me there, because I've heard good things about that. So thanks for that suggestion. Wow, I think I'm talking too much, and these allergies are making me thirsty. Now, these allergies are still affecting me. It's like the longest darn allergy season I've ever experienced, I think. Anyway, who cares? Thanks for the nicknames. The last question you asked. You said you were certified for the 87, 88, and 90 series. No, not quite. Just the 88 and the 90. Does that qualify you on the MD-80? So in other words, if we ended up getting the MD-80s from American Airlines, would I be qualified to fly them? I don't know. That's one of those things that the company does in conjunction with approval from the FAA when they decide differences between various versions of an airplane. How much of a difference is there? Does it require a separate category, a separate rating, or is it just something that you need to send out some information to explain the differences? Like, for instance, at Acme, the differences between the 88 and 90. We're qualified to fly either. We just had to do a little bit of a training program, like a 4-hour simulator for captains. Actually, first officer didn't do any. They got a CD and did some computer-based training. Probably not enough, but the company likes to save money. But if there's enough of a difference, then it has to be a separate category. It's the same rating, by the way. I know this is all confusing. Ratings, categories, that kind of thing. As I mentioned before in this podcast, a pilot that flies the DC-9 and a pilot that flies the Boeing 717 and the pilot like me that flies the 88 and 90, if we all pull out our airline transport pilot licenses and see that the type ratings that we have, they all say DC-9. I've never really flown a DC-9, although really I have, because the MD-88 and the MD-90 are basically just a variant of the DC-9, as the 717 is as well. But the 717, because of its advanced cockpit avionics, is different enough that the company and the FAA has said, nope, that can't be a common category with the 88s and the 90s. It has to be a separate category, separate training. So it's just different enough that we don't want it to be all one category. So that's the way that works. And that changes or differs with airline to airline and who their point of contact is with the FAA. Every airline has, and every fleet and every airline has a representative from the FAA that is basically assigned to that airline and that fleet, and is kind of an interface, personal interface between the company and the FAA. And so a lot of stuff goes on there when they decide different categories and certification, etc. So thanks again, Micah, for your food suggestions, your humor and nicknames, and your question about the DC-9 series of airplanes. Oh, let's see. I still have so much feedback. Let me see. How are we doing here on time? I have a feeling I don't want to look. Wow. I have to stop. I know I'm not anywhere near getting through everybody's feedback, but this is going to be the longest show I've ever recorded. More than, probably about 2 hours and 45 minutes. Sorry. So let me stop. I'm getting hungry anyway. I'm getting thirsty. And so it's time for me to go ahead and end this episode. And that means Tim, Julian, Peter, Brian, Brett, William, Lee, again, Liz, Ralph, and everybody else who sent me feedback. I will answer your feedback on a future episode. So I'm wishing you clear skies, unlimited visibility, and tailwinds. Take care, and God bless.